Where did my rugby story start? My rugby story started, I think, even before I could walk or even understand what rugby was about, because I was always surrounded by sports people, rugby people. My father, his friends, Uncle George Lefan, Uncle Harold Peterson, my grandfather, Joe Fredericks, and then they were always talking about rugby. They were talking about sport. They were talking about the big names, the guys they played against, their heroes, the guys they admired, Mr. Blackie Henderson, Mr. Stevie Reid, all of these people, Walter Joshua. They were talking about these people all the time, and we would listen to these stories. And I suppose that's where my love for the game and for the folklore of the game started. I played, I think, 2 games at primary school, at Progress Primary School. My coach was Mr. Jossie, Mr. Tommy Jossie. But because we lived quite far from where I attended school, I couldn't attend school regularly. I couldn't attend the practices regularly, because we lived in a township very far from where I attended school. So my friends and my peers at school, athletically, they progressed quite fast. And I was left behind because there was no rugby in the area that we stayed in. And I only attended practices now and then. When I went to high school, I played 3 games in Standard 6, or what is known as Grade 8 today. And in one of the games, it is alleged that I tackled my own player. His name was Sheldon Goldstein. And what had happened was, I think it was the 3rd game, 2nd or 3rd game I played. And the game was quite fast. I mean, you must remember, I wasn't used to the game. I wanted to play this game. And the game was very fast. And these were great, these were small guys. Our coach was Mr. Andries Botha. He was my Grade 8 or Standard 6 woodwork teacher. And what happened was I got a knock and I got up and I was actually looking where to get off the field fastest, what was the quickest route off the field. And when I turned around, I saw this whole group of players charging towards me, and it was Sheldon. He had the ball and he was running straight towards me, and before I could react, he had run into me and flattened me. So, and I stopped playing after that because that was when I hurt my knees, and I didn't play again until Grade 11. And that's when I joined Universal, Standard 9. That was in 1982. I joined Universal RFC. Universal has always been part of my rugby life. But basically that is where my rugby journey started, when I started actually mixing with the Universal guys. Well, you couldn't escape politics, because the very fact that I couldn't play rugby at primary school or practice to play rugby at primary school was dictated by the political policies of the time, because our family firstly was forcibly removed from the Bultfontein Road area, where my grandfather had a house, where Shoprite Checkers in Kimberley stands today. And we were forcibly removed as a family from there. We lived with family for a while, but then we moved into a new area called Homevale. I was very small when this happened, so I can't really remember the year and so on. I must have been about 3 or 4 years old at the time. And it was political policy, or the policy of apartheid, that moved people as far as possible from economic activity, cultural activity, social activity, and so on. And even though the area was known as Homevale, it was given the nickname Tips, from the short for Tipperary, from the World War I song, It's a Long, Long Way to Tipperary, because it was really on the outskirts of Kimberley at the time. I mean, Kimberley was a small place, but Tips or Homevale seemed to be so far away from everything. You drove past the brick fields, and once you passed the brick fields, you know you were heading towards Tips. And it was many years later, after we'd been in Tips for a while, they opened up a cinema there. There were a couple of soccer grounds there, but there was no rugby, and rugby was the game I wanted to play. So politics dictated everything. It dictated where you could eat, where you could live, where you could play your games, why you could play your games there, who you could play with, who you couldn't play with. So for people to think that you can separate politics from sport or politics from any aspect of social life, those are people who are steeped in fantasy, they are steeped in mythology, and they are not realists. Oh, look, if it is possible to separate sport from public life, but then you must separate the public from sport. Because if you have a stadium like the Griqualand West GWK Park in Kimberley, there's a social, political history behind the existence of that area, because that area was where our community lived prior to them being removed by the Group Areas Act. And they had a field there, they had a sports field there, they had social hub there, and then the apartheid government intervened and removed people and scattered them all over Kimberley. They scattered some to Jemdene, they scattered some to Homevale, Tips, they scattered some to Florianville or the Floors, they scattered some to Utility, they scattered others to Square Hill Park, and they scattered some to an area known as Colville, which is an acronym for Coloured Village. And other people were scattered to, what is the area's name? West End and Galeshewe and all of those areas. So if you look at just the history of the modern Griquas, the Griquas of Andre Markgraaf and the people that are running Griquas in Kimberley today, they don't know that where their grounds are is where the black community of Kimberley played their rugby. But because of politics and the way they use black faces in South Africa today to legitimize what they're doing, they have completely obliterated the political aspect of their existence, because they deny the historical existence of black rugby. And you can only do that with a political buy-in of the powers that be. So it is possible to separate politics from sport, but then you must remove the public from sport, because when the South African rugby pitched for the 2023 Rugby World Cup, they expected the taxpayers of South Africa to help them foot that bill. And they were asking the taxpayers to support their bid for the 2023 World Cup. When they build a stadium, the Greenpoint Stadium in Cape Town, who is footing that bill? It's the taxpayer, you know. And yet they want to tell the taxpayer, you must keep politics out of sport.